cape.
As we begin this series, journeying through the realms, we're going to start our journey with my personal favorite realm, Chamon, Realm of Metal. Now this is one of the more abstract ones, so brace your imagination, we're going to have a lot of fun talking about this. In this video, we're going to cover the physical makeup, what the realm is actually like, what kind of themes are present, what those themes do to their inhabitants, go through a brief history of the realm, and end up talking about how we can model those themes and that history into your army. To put briefly what all the realms are like, they are the solidified things of magic that have come together and formed a living environment. I'll show you a few pictures here to kind of help me explain this, but imagine a sphere, and everything in this sphere is themed with the magic of metal. Well, through that sphere is a plane, of which we would call the ground, the earth itself. The center of this plane is very stable, perfect for civilization and habitable life forms. And it gets a little crazy the further out towards the edges you go. Once you go near the realm's edge, things get kind of crazy. It's also important to note that every realm has every biome, meaning they all have forests, oceans, deserts, plains, mountains, everything. So every realm has an environment that you're looking for. Well, just proving to be the exception to the rule, Chamon is very different from the others. Rather than one massive plain that spans the entire realm, it's very fractured. They don't have traditional continents and tectonic plates like you might expect. They have a ton of pocket realms or floating islands, really hard to get places that are just kind of scattered about the sky. Many of them are only possible to get through with a realm gate. Now, just as kind of an example to tell you what the realms are like, have this picture here. This is a glass ball with a bunch of bubbles in it. Imagine, rather than having a firm plane going through the entire center, there's all these little mini areas just kind of scattered about the sphere. That's the kind of existence we're talking about in Chamon. And the thing is that they are constantly in flux, because just like metal, this whole realm is malleable. And while this seems very abstract and kind of out there, we've already actually encountered one of these places in the Realm Gate Wars, the kind of island continent, if you will, of Anvarok. It was a massive floating island with a city, a mine, a realm gate, a fortress, all kinds of cool stuff. Some are small, some are colossal, some are like the traditional continent size. One of those bigger ones is called the Spiral Crux, and that's actually the lore that we get for the realm in the core rulebook. Imagine everything that we're going to talk about as far as its history revolves around this one piece of the continent. The realm is massive with multiple of these. So just understand, this is not a comprehensive history, it's just a significant part of it. In terms of the actual makeup of the realm itself, it's very rich in natural resources, obviously metallurgy, significant gems and mines and ore, all these kinds of very important things for industry and civilization growth can be found in Chamon. In fact, as we'll see when we dive into its history next, it's instrumental in kind of the building blocks of those civilizations. It's also important to note that when we talk about the realms having various biomes, meaning the forest, the mountains, things like that, they're not necessarily, everything is not just metal, right? Not just metal trees, not just metal mountains, all these things like that. They just kind of have an influx of that theme, so their mountains might be very rich in an ore that is very unique to the realm. Or it could be a completely normal tree, but the pine needles are metal. You know, those kinds of like, where it's warping your perception. It's not like a robot tree where it's just all metal. It's a mixture of organic and magic and how those things kind of weirdly interact together. But moving into the history of the realm, we start at the Age of Myth. After Grugni, the Dwarven god, was freed by Sigmar, he immediately felt a strong connection to Chamon. He looked about it, his kind of engineering and mining and all these kinds of like the very traditional Dwarven things, it really spoke to him on a deep level. And so he started to form the realm in his image, and he created the 19 Wonders of Chamon. Just a few of them, they didn't go into a comprehensive list, but there's entire cities made of steel, a population of cog people like automatons. And his biggest creation was the God-wrought Isles. And this is basically a series of settlements where it was several islands that were perfectly straight, filled to the gills with natural resources. And imagine like several lines, right? Islands that are all rectangle shaped, just in quick succession next to each other. Well, as trade and civilization begin to happen, society booms in Chamon. There's tons of stuff to trade. Everyone wants what they have in terms of the gold, the minerals, the weapons that they can create. In following of their god Grugni, massively successful smiths and blacksmiths and all these engineers start cropping up in the realm, producing some of the greatest things that civilization had to offer at that point. Now, satisfied with his creation, this experience that he did, and gave his people the best start they could, Grugni leaves to make good on his promise to serve Sigmar in the Pantheon. The travesty being that not even Grugni himself could build and design a realm free from greed. And this is where we're introduced to a new resource, Chamonite. This is the realm stone of the realm of metal. Now, even though the realm itself is kind of a more solidified form of magic, when we talk about realm stone specifically, it's like a mineral that just exudes that power. The kind of thing that if a normal fantasy narrative was to have like a magical artifact, this would be the kind of like the stone that goes in it to make that artifact super magical and powerful. We saw a lot of this in the Soul Wars and kind of Malign Portent series, where Nagash was finding his realm stone, the grave sand from Shyish. It's the same thing but for the realm of metal. So a vastly important and rare resource. Very hard to contain and work with. Well, once Chamonite is discovered, and it's discovered in mass, it's one of the few times we've seen realmstone happen frequently and not necessarily near the realm's edge, but it creates this massive gold rush. When used in forges, it gives smiths incredible power. They can make perfect weapon and tools infused and made with the raw stuff of magic. And just like the real-life American gold rush, it created two things: incredible wealth and crippling disparity. Because jewels and money all flowed very wildly for the affluent. If you could get the mining equipment to do what you needed to do, you could be rolling in money. While the miners, the everyday low man, simply scraped by and could do nothing but exist to mine some more for his boss. And this tension between the lower class and the high class created a rift, and it's going to become very important later on. But at this point, something terrible happens. A god beast, who we've met in the Realmgate Wars, looks upon the realm of metal and sees the god-wrought isles and all the industry and the bustling and all the Chamonite that's being dug up there, and gets a jealous eye. He comes down in hot and heavy. He's a beast the size of a fortress, and he's drawn to that glamour and this rich presence. And he lands in the dead center of those islands. Now here's the thing. This creature is made of pure metal, and he has a magnetic field that is so powerful it warps the islands around him. When you look back at the spiral crux, you are looking at the once perfectly straight-lined islands that have been bowed and warped and twisted around him. And what this does is it destroys the financial balance. Imagine if each one of these islands here was a country, because they functionally are. And you have good trade and good wealth, and we're all making money, and all of a sudden this bomb drops and a bunch of you are twisted. Everyone has devastating earthquakes and tsunamis. It just destroys the commerce and the physical nature of your existence. And with this, new clans, meaning new islands, rise to prominence. Right now that these center islands are all but useless and uninhabitable and being destroyed by that magnetic field, all of a sudden the power swings out to the further ones who were kind of left by the wayside earlier. Huge power shifts happen. And while some kind of seize the opportunity and kind of kick their kin when they're down, others become very insular. They kind of separate themselves from the kind of civilized world. Fighting ensues, and this power struggle comes out into outright conflict as resources change and become scarce. Again, this god beast descending kind of ruined everything. There was a meeting of all the clans held. How are we going to deal with the god beast thing? We can't let things keep going like this. So they put forth 9 of their best warrior mages to go kill the god beast. They wield a 9-sided artifact as part of that important ritual to kill him. And during the ritual, an avalanche happens and kills 8 of them. Well, it turns out the 9th guy who survived the whole thing was actually a Gaunt summoner on disc in disguise. And we'd learn right at that moment this whole thing was a plot of Tzeentch to come and destroy this place. So the ritual actually works. This is important to note. The god beast, the Lode Grifton, is turned into solid gold. His death screams as he kind of roars up into the sky, tears a rent in reality, and Tzeentch demons pour in. It turns out that despair between the poor and the rich created enough prayer for change that Tzeentch himself took notice of the realm. And once he saw the changing metals and the malleable nature of it, he set his schemes on those islands. And this kind of really brings us into the age of chaos. Demons are pouring in mass. fortress walls become prisons as Tzeentch demons kind of swoop over them and kind of kill everyone from the inside. The clans collectively recoil in horror. Demons see the change magic as perfume. They're just hunting everything that's been using the Chamon, all the things that the civilization and the alchemy and all these things that have been used to kind of proliferate their culture has become the very food that these demons are hunting. Many clans who used flying vessels for transportation try to militarize them. Let's shoot down the flying discs and things like that with some gunships that we have. And this ultimately leads to the birth of the Kharadron overlords. Now, of course, there are other forces enter the realm. There's Khorne and Nurgle and Slaanesh and Skaven, but it's largely dominated by Tzeentch. This is the realm that he wants. And because of that, vast parts of it are controlled without contest by the time we meet them in the Age of Sigmar. Now, if you want to know about where they are when AOS begins, we did a series called the Realm Gate Wars where I talked about the Realm of Chamon in detail. It was actually included in one of the opening acts of the story arc. To put it briefly, this is where Galmaraz, Sigmar's hammer, had landed. We encounter a Tzeentch wizard on Anvarok, meet a god beast named Argentine, who's not the same one from the earlier in the story here. And at the end of it all, their Allgate, the one that leads to Archaon's main fortress, and you can get troops in there really easily, is still controlled by the forces of chaos, firmly in his grasp. Again, we covered all of that in great detail in the Realm Gate Wars. I'm just kind of catching you up here. And that is a brief synopsis of the history that we have in Chamon. What I'd like to do now is transition over and talk about ways you can theme your army to be from that realm, taking in elements of what the realm is like physically, as well as some cool kit bashing ideas to have some fun with it. So as we talk about theming an army from a specific realm, what we're really trying to do is draw out those kind of inspirations, those kind of feels that we get when we discuss a realm, and how can we convey that through an army? Well, to do that, we need to discuss what life is like in the realm of metal, and it's actually a very fascinating one that I really appreciate. You're going to have a world that is based on a few things, really. Wealth is a huge deal. It comes up again and again in their main kind of story they were given, is that the riches of the land created a wealth disparity between the rich and the poor, and that's something you can definitely play up. You can have it be old, rusted metal and broken down stuff, that's the poor end aspect, or you can be the wealthy, affluent, filled with jewels and things like that. You could even have both, having the kind of lower infantrymen be kind of like worn, everything's kind of rusted, kind of worn down instruments that are used by laborers, and then have all of your heroes be very wealthy and affluent. That would definitely kind of incorporate some of that story we saw in the core rulebook. And another interesting thing that has been touched on, actually by the Warhammer community team, by Duncan himself, is technology. See, because this society has been so advanced in terms of being able to make new and exciting kinds of tools and instruments and things like that with Chamon, they kind of have a feel for more what we would know as like steampunk, advanced technology for the mortal realms. Think, for example, that this is where the Kharadron overlords came from. Think about their aesthetic. What they are was directly inspired by the events that happened here. That doesn't mean to say that every army has to be steampunky or anything like that, but when you're looking at like, what does this type of realm create? Well, it birthed them, and that kind of matters. So we're going to kind of break this down into three main areas, and that is color schemes, kit bashing and conversions, and army construction. What kind of units you actually use in the game. Starting with colors is probably the most simple, basic, and easily recognizable system. Well, if you can imagine, just really stretch your mind out there, that the realm of metal would probably have a very wide array of metals, and so that's something you can definitely incorporate. Silver, copper, gold, all these kinds of rich colors, very earthy tones, can add a lot to your army. Keep in mind, there's different kinds, like Leadbelcher is not necessarily the full width of all steel, right? There's dark and worn, and there's Warhammer TV articles for all these things like that, all YouTube videos, where you get really dark steel by doing several washes of Narn oil. So that looks very almost diesel punky, where it's very worn and weathered and covered in soot. And then there's also kind of high metal, so you have chrome and those kinds of we use Stormhost silver, and it's kind of very bright, intense, almost white type of metallics. And that same disparity in color kind of goes with gold, copper, bronze, all those kinds of things as well. You can really add a lot more color than you'd think to just by using metals alone. However, don't make the mistake of thinking that they are limited to metals. Not everything is literally made of metal. If you look at my Slaves of Darkness army, they have a lot of metals going on. They have some black plates, but they also have a white flowing cape. What I'm simply saying is that having your metallics kind of be the forefront of your army theme conveys the idea of metallics and metal and Chamon and all those kinds of things, and then having your fabrics be a bright, almost contrasting color can really make them pop. One thing I'd also add, because you don't want your entire Leadbelcher, bronze metallic army to look boring, the use of washes goes a long way when it comes to doing metallics. For example, with my, the Palisade, the Crystal Wall Malign Sorcery Infinite spell, basically what I did for that was a series of metallics to make the actual base coat, and then I washed it with Colia Greenshade and whatever the Caribou Crimson is, and so that kind of gave this cool transition from a blue to a red and all these kinds of things. It's just metal. It's just Stormhost Silver, but these kind of little color variations added life to it. Remember, you're not just theming things based on metal, but the properties of them. You want to convey what the realm is like, and the realm itself is a kind of an ever-changing, slightly influenced by Tzeentch himself, and so having those kind of washes that kind of contrast with each other really goes a long way to kind of bringing that out in metallics. And basing. Basing can go a long way when it comes to modeling an army from a particular realm. In fact, I'd probably say it goes further than a lot of paint schemes in terms of directly conveying an idea. As far as basing goes from Chamon, probably rough, rugged terrain, like I said earlier in the video, that has every single biome, so you can do whatever you want. I'm just simply doing things that really nail home the idea of the realm of metal, like very someone can instantly look at it and know what you're going for. So maybe rugged, jagged, full of jewels, crystals and things like that would definitely convey that idea of rich mineral soil. Keep in mind there's been a lot of discussion lately about basing your endless spells and how you can do that so it looks cohesive with your army no matter where your army is, where they're from, what kind of force composition there is, and basing them from a realm is not a bad way to go. Point is, don't limit yourself to just doing what, kind of bland bases. If you want to bring home the idea of doing metal, you can really dive into that. Like I said, there's a few ways you can go. Rugged terrain, which is really easy to do with some of the Sterling Battlemire texture paint from GW. I love that stuff. I use it on most of my bases. But also doing things like if you get the Realm of Battle, what are they called? Shattered Dominion bases. I do use those for my Slaves to Darkness. And I fill those up with gold and gems just to kind of highlight that idea. Now, moving into how to kind of theme your army construction. This is from folks who really just want a full narrative experience. What I would really say to you is look at that map of the Spiral Crux again and pick a location that you think sounds and or looks cool and theme your army from there. Because when you're theming from a location, there are a few things you can really kind of dive into just from thinking about it hardly and kind of build your army as you go. By this I mean if you pick a city or place that's in a mountain range, you're probably not going to have a lot of cavalry because horses would struggle to move in that kind of terrain. Conversely, if you were in a big open field, cavalry and fast lightning attacks would be superior to walking on foot. And if you really want to dive into the lore, this is something I'm going to be trying to do with Jess's Nighthaunt army, is go through that process. I just released a video on about making stories for your individual heroes, kind of forging the lore for them specifically. And do that, and then have whatever place there is, and have the two mesh together, meaning my general really favors guerrilla tactics with people on foot and they're from the mountains, so you kind of weave those stories in together and kind of create like this is who he is, the leader, and this is why he has these specific units. As far as units that like theme wise are specifically from the realm of metal, honestly everything's kind of everywhere, and it's hard to really say. I mean, my gut reaction is like things with higher technological levels, like free guild handgunners, guns are more advanced technology, make more sense, but that's not necessarily a limiting factor, and I don't want it to be perceived that way. Because let's be honest, there's clan pestilence everywhere, and so the fact that they are also from the realm of metal means that it's not about a technological race. Really, my thought there is simply just if you want that kind of in-depth narrative experience, pick a place, theme your army from there specifically. That'll dictate how you do your bases, because you'll want bases to match that location, and then also just pick units that make sense. Now, last up, we're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about kit bashing. I'm going to show you some examples, not finished examples. I'm actually going to be working on some of these, and so we'll dive into that. Let's head over to the Games Workshop site. Actually, I lied. Before we go to Games Workshop, there's one thing I want to touch on when it comes to kit bashing and conversion, and that is this idea that less is more. Meaning, it's the little things that you do to a unit, to a army, that really drive home the kind of flavor that we're talking about. Much like the bases have a huge ability to kind of convey location and feel and tone, so do little bits of kit bashing. And this is, I just mean taking a bit from one kit, throwing on another. Nothing too complicated. I don't teach people to sculpt amazing things out of green stuff. But let's take a look at some of the things that we can do to convey those little bits of feeling, and then kind of some of the bigger, cooler conversions. So here we are on the Games Workshop page, and this is obviously under order, and we have the tabs for Keratin Overlords and Ironweld Arsenal. Both things that are highly technological, and well, frankly, the Keratin Overlords are from, their kind of origin story is directly tied into the realm of metal. Now here's the thing, they are not specifically from there necessarily, it's been a long time. So if you're playing a KO army, do not feel like you have to be from the realm of metal at all. In addition to that, what I would say is the themes that we're seeing here, lots of metallics, high technology, mining equipment, because again, this is all based on achieving and getting minerals. And that's kind of the stuff we want to draw out. If you're talking about kit bashing, something like the Arcanaut kit, you load it up here, slow internets. This is a great kit full of little bits. So you have the cool little handguns, a harpoon launcher, mining pick, those kinds of things. These little bits that reinforce the idea of one technology, two mining, and just kind of this rugged, I don't know, laborer existence. These guys look like laborers, and so conveying some of that theme, let's go to their bits section here, is a stellar idea. Whether you take heads, axes are pretty cool. I like those axes. Not a big fan of the swords, but that's okay. But then all these little odds and ends, the shoulder pads, handguns, yeah, these are all great bits to use to kind of convey, oh, there's some cool harpoons right there, booyah. Great ways to convey that kind of worker aesthetic. And going back to the main page, we see that we are looking at, I don't know, just some cool things that you can use for bits. For example, okay, this is an idea that we're getting into more of the bigger stuff here. And this is an idea that I really want to do because if, like I said before, my Slaves to Darkness are from the realm of metal. But when you look at, say, the Arcanaut frigate, okay, or even, what's the little one, the Gunstock gun hauler, you don't need to use this exact ship to convey the idea of, I don't know, metallics and things like that. What I'm trying to say is I intend to take this little balloon that he has on top, the one full of ether gold, and I want to put it on top of here. I want to get rid of these monster guys. I want to put the balloon on top there and kind of bring home that feel. I'm going to put chaos symbols all over this thing, make it just absolutely sick looking. And so I'll get rid of this dwarven head right there. But yeah, and so what I'm saying is incorporating those kinds of elements into your army. Just literally to smashing those kits together, taking the bubble and putting it on the Chaos War Shrine would help with the idea like, okay, so this Chaos band that I'm creating has obviously at some point beaten up a KO army to the point where they've been able to harvest their technology, and being a technologically civilized race themselves or clan themselves have been able to incorporate that into their forces. So those kinds of things. Again, picking a force that comes from a specific realm is a great way to start integrating. So like if you, no matter what faction you play, destruction, death, or chaos, not just order stuff, if you were to go through this and just dismantle these kits and integrate them into your own armies, I bet you'd have some really cool things. The reason for that is simply because they are themed to be from the realm of metal. Like inherently, that's where they're from. Anywhere they are on their kind of timeline, that was always their origin point. And so it's kind of a cool way to incorporate those things. Now, another way you can go, and one that actually Duncan Rhodes himself is doing from Games Workshop, you go over to 40K in the section for Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, if you don't know, the Adeptus Mechanicus is a really cool faction in 40K where they use technology that is incredibly superior, but because of the way that they, like, information was lost during that kind of their story arc, it looks super old, rickety, and steampunk, but it is in fact some of the most advanced technology ever, is what I'm trying to say. And one of the things that Duncan is doing, and I'll pull it up here, is he is going to these Skitarii Rangers and taking their guns and putting them on free guild soldiers. The idea is they are from the realm of metal, and they have access to a lot of technology from trading with the Keratin Overlords, and so these types of weapons will be available to them, basically just replacing the simple handgun, which is a really cool idea. And since I've built about 20 or so of these dudes, one that I fully intend to steal, giving him credit, of course. But even just that little thing, we're just taking a weapon and putting it in someone else's hands, but we can do so much with that. Again, it's the little thing. Now let's go back here. One thing that I want to do is, you see this Onager Doomcrawler, which is a killer tank, by the way. If you have not seen one of these in person, they look super cool. I want to take this, and I want to take off that entire top and have the spider legs, and I want to put a steam tank underneath. Yeah, here we go. I think that would be amazing. If you had a steam tank, give him a cooler pistol, and then just have him, get rid of the wheels, obviously, but having this guy ride into battle on some spider legs, and even like the fleur-de-lis kind of images there match some of the imagery you see here on the side of the tank. Again, the AdMech are really great for that because they do have this kind of historical looking thing going on with their aesthetic. So this is actually a fantastic place. Again, if you're looking for bits, not a bad place to go. There's some cool things here if you're looking for more like the electrodes, and all those kinds of things all over these guys. Got some cool weapons, and their kits, just so you know, are loaded to the gills with bits. There are so many conversion opportunities in all of the AdMech stuff. It is a little bit unwieldy for a new person. I grabbed a Start Collecting box, which is basically just the Doomcrawler, these guys, and one of the lower level heroes, I think this guy. And had a hard time kind of assembling it all because there's so many options available to them. Just kind of going through a lot of these things, like this guy. He's really cool, and I don't doubt that at all. The thing is that his base size and kind of the proportions of him make it a little bit harder to use him in some things. But obviously your standard troops are the same size as Free Guild. This thing's going to be pretty close to being the size of a tank when you get that top off. I've held it in my hand. I know it's not terribly different, and so forth. So my point being is that the Adeptus Mechanicus range is another great one to look at if you're looking for cool bits and conversion opportunities. Really, the main things you're probably going to look for when you come to looking for bits and things like that amongst various kits, weapons technology and those kinds of things. Whether it's a gun, it doesn't have to be a gun, but just a mighty weapon in some sense. Like a lot of the dispossessed weapons, or even Carriage and Overlord's melee weapons, look very over the top, very highly mechanical, well crafted. Those kinds of things really do mean a lot. In addition to that, some of the Fire Slayer weapons, I know we're talking all about Dwarden, but they really do focus on craftsmanship, are perfect for this kind of ornate, well crafted, used, maybe Chamonite in the forge, those kinds of things. So there are a lot of ways to kind of convey those things. In addition to weapons, which is obviously a really big one, doing small things like jewels, like I said earlier, but even just literally jewels on their body and their armor, having a lot of contrasting colors, precious minerals all around them are a great way to go. So friends, I want to tell you about why I love this realm so much, why I decided to start with it. Well, the simple fact of the matter is, Chamon is actually my favorite of the realms just from its lore. By this I mean, here's the thing, it's the most abstract in terms of how it's made up. Right, we got a bajillion floating little islands, a lot of it you can only get to with a realm gate. It's kind of hard to imagine how it works and structures and those kinds of things. You got god beasts flying around. I know it's very hard, very abstract to think about, but here's the thing. I think more so than any other realm, it gives us a taste of something that we understand, and that is greed. We all know greed. As soon as the core rulebook mentioned that there's basically this huge rush for minerals over in the realm of metal, it just, when it painted that picture of the disparity between the rich and the poor and the miners and the workers, it felt very understandable, very relatable, and that's something that really stuck out to me when I was reading it. That whole story arc, not so much with the god beast coming down and being killed by Tzeentch, but everything leading up to that, how it was made perfect, but the greed of men in Dwarden came in and kind of saturated it and ruined it even before chaos ever touched it, but that just invited chaos in. It was the reason why the mortal realms will always be afflicted, is because at the end of the day, nothing beats profit. The oppression, the being run down, is what caused Tzeentch to have a foothold ultimately and turn his eye towards the realm. It could have been perfect, it could have been great, but ultimately it wasn't, and that had nothing to do with the fault of gods. It was just us. And for as far and abstract and crazy as Age of Sigmar can be, that is a concept that resonates with me. I understand how greed destroys things. We've seen corporate greed and what it can do to people. We've seen terrible events happen, and then we'll try to capitalize on each other, forgetting that we're all trying to survive on this planet together. And for those reasons, this story really hit home to me. It's very important to me. Again, because it is so understandable and so relatable, even though we're kind of set in this very crazy setting. I love the modeling opportunities it gives me. You can diverse your army in a lot of different ways because the Realm of Metal isn't necessarily specific to one race. Even though the Keratin Overlords came out of it, they have since gone everywhere amongst the skies. So it doesn't really have a singular race that defines it, kind of like the Sylvaneth are so easily defined in Gurian. Nothing is quite so easily defined in Chamon. And I love everything about it. I love the colors it gives me, the kind of cool gem effects I get to do. Metallics are easy to paint and easy to look amazing. And all these things make for an exciting realm both to learn about in the lore, play in as a realm. We're going to be doing a video covering the actual realm rules here in a little bit, and just experience and fall in love with it. So friends, thank you so much for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you in my next AOS lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey Wargamers, thank you so much for watching that video. Be sure to hit subscribe and click the little bell notification icon so you're alerted to all new videos coming out.